When it comes to weight management, we tend to focus on what we eat, but Noom's approach puts the focus on why we eat. That's a game changer. Noom uses science and personalization to help you manage your weight for the long term. Their psychology-based approach helps build better habits and behaviors that are easier to maintain. The best part? You decide how Noom fits into your life, not the other way around. Sign up for your trial today at Noom.com. That's Noom.com to sign up today.
From your favorite source for Chicago White Sox talk, delivering news, interviews, analysis, and more. This is the Sox Machine Podcast with your hosts, Jim Margulis and Josh Nelson.
Thanks, Rob, and welcome to a new episode of the Sox Machine Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Nelson, and we continue our 2023 review episodes, recapping how the past season went, with a look ahead to this upcoming offseason for the Chicago White Sox, and ponder how they could change this roster to compete in 2024. This episode will feature the White Sox starting pitching staff, and joining me per usual is the managing editor of SoxMachine.com, Jim Margulis, but we're also joined by our friend James Fegan, which you read his work in The Athletic and in the Chicago Sun-Times at the end of the 2023 season, covering both the White Sox and the Cubs. And James, welcome back to the show, and thank you to everyone also who responded positively to the roundtable discussion we had with Dan Bernstein and Lawrence Holmes on 6 The Score. With us talking about pitching, James, I wonder, is this like your favorite baseball topic to write about, the art and science of pitching?
Yeah, I guess, because like hitting's still confusing for me to understand. So pitching's a shade better. I would say that's the connection I've really made. Sure.
Okay. Jim, I don't know about you, Jim. Like, we've been podcasting for 10 years. I would say more like on the history side of baseball might be your like favorite or go-to topic to write about. But where does pitching stack up as far as baseball topics to write about?
It's up there just because they're the ones creating the action, whereas hitters are responding. And like when it comes to pitching coaches and what they impart, I think it's a lot clearer in terms of what they might be able to accomplish for certain pitchers. Whereas we've watched the White Sox go from Frank Menachino to Jose Castro, and now they'll be on their third hitting coach in 3 years. And I gave up complaining about hitting coaches or like, I guess championing change probably after Jeff Manto. So like, I don't really, I don't have a feel for hitters because the White Sox don't really have a feel for hitters. Whereas occasionally with pitchers, they have a success story and you kind of see where they're going with that.
Yeah. The poor hitters in baseball, no matter what level, they're all catching up. Even like reading recently in fall ball on how college programs, like the top college programs, with what they're adding to the pitching labs and which ex-major leaguers now that they are bringing in as unpaid coaches to provide advice and how to manipulate their labs or add to their labs to meet what major league teams have. It's pitching, like the science of it just continues to move forward and at a much higher rate than hitters are catching up. So when hitters are hitting well, like we saw in this past draft class, that's why they get taken so early, because it's like so rare for hitters to hit that well at that type of level, and it progressively is getting worse in the minors of the major leagues overall as a league. So that's why I like talking about pitching. And when it comes to pitching for the Chicago White Sox, the good news is they did something well where the hitters did not do anything well. The White Sox as a team were one of the best strikeout teams in Major League Baseball. They ranked 6th last year in strikeouts per 9 innings. That's pretty much it. Everything else for the White Sox, mission accomplished. They struck out more batters. Everything else was bottom 10, especially when it comes to the walks, home runs. They were in the bottom 5 of Major League Baseball. They're still not doing a great job of trying to keep the ball on the ground, which is imperative at guarantee rate field. And there's just some work to be done on the pitching staff for the Chicago White Sox. Everybody knows that. But before we get into the specific pitchers, a little bit of a exercise here, Jim. So I'm asking our listeners and our readers to pull out a notepad, either on your computer or your handy notebook next to you. And here is the exercise 1 through 5 with the pitchers that the Chicago White Sox currently have on October 16, 2023. What is the White Sox 5-man starting rotation before the offseason begins?
It's really frightening that Michael Kopech is number 2, apparently, based on who's left. Cease is obviously number 1. Then it's like Kopech, even though he finished the year in the bullpen and then on the injured list. It's really sketchy. I think after that, you have Tuki Tucson, who's like pitched well enough to be like a 5th starter, I think, and absorb some starts and like pitch well enough to give 4 or 5 innings with somebody ready to piggyback or carry like the middle innings if need be. And then, yeah, I mean, like I said, Jose Urena, but I think he's a free agent because of his, the buyout. I think like the way the White Sox got him was taken care of already. So like, yeah, he's a free agent. So I guess it would be like Jesse Scholten's, Tanner Banks, if they want to protect like dipping into like Christian Mania territory. So I think I named 4 after all that. So I guess you would have to go like to Nick Nastrini, like throw him in the deep end and hope he survives if they're going to like actually aim to compete. Otherwise, I think you go with like Tanner Banks. If you're looking to protect the top layer of Charlotte at all costs, it's probably Tanner Banks going like 3 or 4 and then figure it out from there.
That's a good enough staff to win the American League Central in 2024, right, James?
This is the portion where in triple play, I go to see who in free agents, like, they couldn't add to a team because they didn't sign soon enough is available, and I just signed them, and I have like a number 2 starter who's just like freely available. Or I don't know, in Sin City where I just trash my town because I'm frustrated with it with hurricanes, and then start over. I think that's the point I reach. Cease is there, right?
Yep.
You quickly get to the point of why Kopech is in the rotation and why they kind of like latch onto it, because there's no kind of like potential to go elsewhere. So like Clevinger doesn't count for this exercise, right?
No, he does not.
You can't magically make Davis Martin healthy for this exercise either.
I guess you could. I mean, he's still part of the organization, so if you think that the White Sox would have him penciled in,
if the season started today,
sure.
that would not be a great rehab process, probably.
Human shield, yeah.
I would just go ahead and throw Nastrini up there. I mean, he certainly thinks he's ready among as much as anyone else. That was his opening interview. We're just like, hey, what do you like about the White Sox? Upward mobility.
Yeah, I saw that in Baseball America. I saw that you had the same quote talking about like with the Dodgers, they're so low, they're so good developing players. Like, I don't know how I'm going to break through here. ... Like,
there's a very clear path to the rotation, is what he
yes.
said. I guess you throw Tuki back out there. Like, he has serviceable starts. He has decent stuff. You'd hope. Well, now that the offseason plan has kind of been wrecked by the season starting today, but you hope with an offseason some of the progress he talked about as far as repeating his delivery compounds. I think multiple looks against division opponents against Tanner Banks is going to be a gnarly affair. I get the idea that he throws enough strikes to keep like it's a Band-Aid that doesn't seem like problematic right maybe the first look or so. I really don't like throwing Garrett Crochet into the fire beyond the fact that has he ever really shown starter level command at any point in his career? I'm doing something that I did a lot in the press box, and certainly some of my colleagues did near the end of the last season, of just looking at the roster to remind myself who's on the team.
Yeah, it's bad.
Scholten's is serviceable, but there's no upside. Patino is like...
And they don't have Brent Honeywell anymore. They let him go.
They don't have him to kick around anymore.
Davy Garcia maybe had some moments, but is he stretched out enough?
The moments, I wonder how much are just him letting it eat and like maxing out his velocity, and then he starts to bats, and what does that work if he stretches out? I guess hope Luis Patino gets healthy, and it's going to be a revolving door and the fifth like starter of this made-up rotation. But like I think I give Patino some run, and when he hits the rocks, Schulten's my emergency guy who will throw strikes. Presumably they always say like, "Oh, this guy at least will throw strikes," and then when you don't miss mats and your counts go really deep because everyone's fouling off your mediocre stuff, you wind up walking 4 or 5 guys on bad nights anyway. But I think I'd go the upside play, given that my season seems doomed from conception. Looking at this exercise,
yeah. And I think this exercise is helpful, especially for our listeners and readers that are getting prepared for the offseason plan project. This is where a lot of the focus is going to be for those playing GM, acting as, well, I have to say Chris Getz now, Jim. I almost said Rick Hahn. Wow, bad habits. Old habits, I should say. Now you have to pretend that you're Chris Getz, trying to convince Jerry Reinsdorf that you need to spend more resources on the pitching staff.
Which he loves to do.
Yeah, which he loves to do. Because right now, your rotation's looking like Dylan Cease, Tuki Toussaint, Jesse Schultens, Michael Kopech, and Nick Nastrini. That's what I wrote down heading into this offseason. And clearly the White Sox could use 2 or 3 more pitchers. But let's talk about the guy that's going to be part of the rotation, and that's Dylan Cease. Now, I don't think the White Sox are going to trade Cease this offseason. That would be kind of difficult depending on how they try to sell that idea that we're trying to compete in 2024, but moving Cease would be clearly a direction of further down the rebuild road. And Cease almost got traded. He was definitely out there, but the White Sox couldn't find a partner by the deadline. He pitched 33. He made 33 starts with a 4.58 ERA, 177 innings, leading the White Sox. He had a 3.7 WAR. If you look at Fangraphs, if you look at Baseball Reference, it was 2.4. If you look at Baseball Prospectus, it's 1.4. And I feel like if I invited an analyst from each of those sites, it might start a fight, Jim, asking, was Dylan Cease good in 2023? Because the fight wouldn't be so much about Dylan Cease. The fighting would be in how these 3 sites calculate some key metrics. And that has sometimes been a condescending argument, especially online between the 3 sites. We're not aiming to do that, but Dylan Cease would be a great example on just how things can vary between the 3 sites we all lean on for these types of key metrics. So, Jim, was Dylan Cease good in 2023?
He was good enough to give the White Sox something they needed. He didn't give them everything they needed, but he made 33 starts, 377 innings. Didn't get torched the way somebody who, he led the league in walks to 78 last year, walked 1 more guy, also hit 6 more batters. So a lot of free bases in fewer innings. So like you would expect that if he were not having his strikeout stuff, or like he was more hittable in previous years because he couldn't quite find like his 99 mile per hour fastball for most of the year. Like you'd expect it to go a lot worse. And it was fine start to start, just like he never had that run of like 6-7 inning starts that might help put a dent in his ERA to where like, if he had 1 dud that was only like 3 or 4 innings and he gave up 5 or 6 runs, he just couldn't make it up. So I think like the ERA is more or less accurate, but just because of his in-start stamina or like his inefficiency, it prevented his good starts from being that good to overshadow the starts that weren't so. But like he was fine. It just, to me, I wonder just where the max power went and whether like that was a feature of last year that was just lucky, or like his physical peak. And now this is something settling into more ordinary. But the funny thing is, if you look at his ERA and FIP the last 2 years, combine them, 3.37 ERA, 3.4 FIP. So like basically they're identical. They just didn't match in any of the individual seasons. So maybe that's just kind of regression setting in and evening out over the course of 2 years instead of 1.
And we pondered, James, could the pitch clock be impacting Dylan Cease, especially in the velocity side, that he couldn't throw max velocity because he had to be mindful of trying to get the ball out within 20 seconds. Was that ever an issue when you talked to Dylan over the course of the season? Did he ever mention how the pitch clock was impacting him?
Not once, really. I mean, not in terms of velocity, certainly not.
Okay.
When I asked, him about it, he really couldn't put something on it. Certainly the mechanical issue of, flying open that he dealt with, started throwing everything off. But then there were times later in the season where he thought spoke really confidently like he had fixed it, but you didn't really see it come back. I thought start in Boston, he kind of saw his top velocity again. And then the next start, it was back to where he had been all season. So there was never really a firm answer. When I talked to Ethan about it, it was kind of as has been pointed out a lot, he's made every start. He hasn't really missed a start for injury. I think I covered him throwing a bullpen in 2017 when they shut him down in Kannapolis for shoulder stiffness, and he hasn't had really an arm issue since he's coming over to the White Sox. And the way Ethan put it was just, you're not going to make 33 starts a year, years on end, and stay at 97. That's just not going to happen. You don't see guys maintain that sort of elite velocity while posting at the level that he's posted. So I don't know if that's kind of cover for general wear and tear or kind of smaller things at work. But it seems like maybe he's feeling, the consistent workload he's had over the last couple of years, even though, I could say that in his innings count, that, Bob Gibson is, spinning his grave because it's never been even 185 innings in a season. But I don't know if it didn't paint this rosy picture of 97s coming back at some point down the road, just from natural rest and recovery.
Got it. So following up on the flying open mechanic issue that Dylan Cease was fighting, and Jim, we talked about this over the course of the season. Sometimes it's really bad where the fastball, especially against righties, is ending up in the left-hander's batter's box. It's just non-competitive fastballs coming from Dylan Cease in 2023. Was there anything in particular when you talked to him or Ethan Katz over the season that Cease was trying to focus on in trying to improve that mechanical flaw in his rotation?
Certain exercises or anything like that?
Yeah.
They talked about diving into his biomechanics and looking at readouts of it and where he was doing it, where his hip was opening up in a way that he apparently had never had to do before. It seemed like that would be kind of your description of how he looked in 2020 when the issues really came to an head. And a lot of the core velocity belt exercises and the stuff that kind of filled his breakout and coming into his own seemingly knocked some of that out. So it seemed like it took everybody by surprise the way that it kind of took over the season, or at least the first half of the season. But then there was a menagerie of other issues that came up, in the course of the second half, even after they said that they had mostly felt like they had turned a corner on it. There was certainly some games where they thought he was tipping, which I really felt was kind of an issue for a lot of the season, in a way that, I don't know, is that an issue you pin on for why this team had more blow up outings than they should have? There's certainly something that was pointed out in the Kopech stuff. Some of the pitchers they lost and went over to other places and did better. Some of the stuff I heard from scouts was they felt that he was tipping with the White Sox and that maybe got corrected over there with other teams. It's certainly stuff that they seem like they were aware of, after a game and corrected, but it definitely ate some of their games. But by the end of the season, when they've traded everyone out and they're just getting rocked because they're throwing out AAA staff, I can't say that tipping is the reason why Jesse Schultens wasn't an all-star.
Yeah, I'm sure tipping was not Jesse's downfall. But I guess with the discussion of Dylan Cease, Jim, for White Sox fans, the biggest question is, can he return to his 2022 form? Because if he can, then you want to keep this guy to help lead a rotation to get back into contention. But if there's a lack of confidence, let's say, that Cease cannot return to that form, I could see quite a few offseason plan projects from White Sox fans this offseason, Jim, trying to come up with trades to move Dylan Cease just because they're not confident he can return back to that form, and he does have 2 more years of team control as he enters the final 2 years of arbitration. Where's your confidence slide, Jim? Do you think that Cease can return back to his 2022 form?
It's hard to say just because the walks present such a tightrope for him. It's just a lot of base runners unforced that really make it hard to negotiate. And that's why, like, when he finished runner-up in 2022, I thought, like, oh, that's a neat trick, but also I expected some regression to be baked in. And so, like, having Lucas Giolito rebound was really important. Having Lance Lynn fully back from his knee injury would have been really important, just to absorb the regression that C suffered. And just happened to be that he regressed a little bit farther than the White Sox could tolerate, but also so many other things went wrong, kind of like Andrew Benintendi on the offensive side. Like, there are 5 billion problems to talk about before you can get to Dylan Cease, like, underscoring it too much, but also it is kind of a problem if you're expecting him to cover for other roster spots. Like, in 2022, he was good enough to, like, cover for maybe a patchy fifth starter in a way that his 2023 form, like, he can take care of himself. Like, he's fine being like a number 2 or number 3 starter in anybody's rotation. Like, everybody's happy to have him. But if you're looking to get by with 4 starters or even like 3 starters, maybe 2 starters that the White Sox have right now, he's not that guy. So I think that's why I was a little disappointed when the trade deadline came and went and the White Sox didn't find a killer deal to move him, just because, like, I didn't want to be moved for the sake of moving him. I didn't think he was like a time bomb ready to blow up and, like, get out from him no matter what. But just trying to think about, like, everything that has to click into place to get that 2022 season, as long as he's walking 70, 80 guys a year with the full season's workload, and, you know, the hit by pitches also fluctuate. It's really hard to maintain that kind of run prevention ability when he's just inviting that much traffic himself.
And James, at the trade deadline, things got weird. Now, really looking back at it a couple months later, the guys who are making the trades are no longer with the franchise. They have been let go. We're always going to be making fun of the Jake Burger trade, I think, moving forward. No offense to Jake either, man. We're all rooting for you to do well. But that trade is not aging well, and that's just for everyone that was against Kenny Williams, that's the final parting gift.
It's the parking meters deal.
It's the parking meter deal. But with Dylan Cease, like, what's the vibes here that you get the impression, James, when you talk to people within the White Sox? Are they really willing to move Dylan Cease?
I mean, I can't say I've had like a lot of conversations about it, about the long-term view of him, just because I haven't been present for a lot of those as much as I used to, but I would think they are. It's just that kind of strips away anything, it strips away whatever gold plating is like remaining about whether or not this is a rebuild or whether or not this is a long-term project. Because at that point, you've hacked down the pitching staff to really nothing, and everything you have remaining is like either, you know, a project or a prospect or like kind of reclamation work. Like it would be kind of a level of surrender that I feel like, while, you know, they're moving the ship closer to acknowledging, you know, this is a multi-year process, this would be kind of, it would tear away a lot of the face of what you're able to represent. At the same time, if you get this huge bounty that, you know, kickstarts a new vision of how the team can be competitive, or at least helps it out a lot, then I think it justifies itself. Or certainly I think if they're out of contention at the deadline again, you know, which they probably will be looking at the roster, then I think it justifies itself a lot more, especially when, you know, how much control will be left at that point. But I think unless it's like major league ready pieces, and even then I don't see how you really rebuild the rotation without it. I think it would be a level of acknowledgement that I'd be taken aback a little bit if the franchise was ready to make that level of acknowledgement, as much as it seems like the logical path, just because there's so much work to do. It then begs the question of, when do you stop? Like, does this conversation start involving like Luis Robert?
No, that's a good point. Yeah, if you do decide to move Cease this offseason, you might just continue moving down the rebuild path. Because I'm with you, James. I feel like that would be the domino that sets off a chain of reaction of, oh, haha, we're kidding. We're not competing in 2024. Forget everything that Jerry Reinsdorf said back in mid-August when he fired Kenny Williams and Rick Hahn. We are going another direction after our initial deep dive and a deeper dive. Jim showed that we're in worse shape than we thought.
Yeah, Branch Rickey would need 5 years to get it done.
So that is Dylan Cease, and that's a large chunk of our conversation because, again, there's a lot of things that everyone is going to be thinking about with your off-season plan projects. If you're going to hold on to Dylan Cease, what are we looking for to see if he could bounce back to his 2022 form? One of the best pitchers in the American League. If you decide to trade Dylan Cease, how will that impact the rest of the White Sox starting rotation? Now, we've talked a lot about the decisions that Chris Getz has to make after the season is over. And as we record this, the league championship series in both the American and National Leagues have started. And again, these decisions have to be made within 10 days when the World Series ends. We talked about Tim Anderson. We've talked about Liam Hendricks, but Mike Clevinger. But this is a unique situation here, Jim, because it's a mutual option. Both parties have to mutually opt in order for that player to come back. It's a $12 million contract for the 2024 season, or it's a $4 million buyout. Just from a White Sox perspective, Jim, should Chris Getz accept their end of the mutual option from what they saw from Clevinger in 2023?
I mean, based on the rotation we outlined, without him, it seems like, yeah. I mean, just even if they want to trade him, like they probably could, like if they accepted the option, because like they've done it's an $8 million calculation for them because of that buyout that they have to pay anyway. So 1 year for $8 million effectively is a no brainer. I mean, like he's not the most pleasant guy. Like I would like to see the White Sox move on just because I hate hosting conversations about him on SoxMachine.com. Like I can understand the argument on both sides being like, it's a business. It's personal. Like he reminds me of things I don't want to think about. Like I get both sides of it, and yeah, the White Sox already signed him. So he's already here. So there is a level of just like, the hard part has already been done. It's a little bit easier to live with now, but it just seems like they should exercise it and like let Clevinger walk, because like it's $8 million effectively because of the money involved and the buyout involved. And the buyout was the whole reason why they couldn't really move him. It could even find like a taker on waivers, because that last month would have been really expensive for somebody like Mike Clevinger because of the buyout just looming over everything.
Yeah, that's a good point. And James, did Clevinger meet the White Sox expectations when they jumped the market to sign him last November?
I guess so, in terms of like he was productive, like he got the innings, he got the outs. His like stuff and like bat missing, it didn't necessarily return to previous levels, which is what they kind of thought they could pull off. Like I don't like look at a guy with kind of like an average strikeout rate with like a lengthy injury history, and you know, when he's now 32 years old, and think he's like the best bet. Like, you know, 20% K rate below average, you know, bat missing. I don't think it would really shock anyone if it kind of fell off a cliff either. Like the you know, the FIP minus is pretty like middle of the road. It's you know, all the advanced metrics kind of say like you got a good solid year out of this, but it's not really like you know, it's. I'd be much better convinced that like, you know, Dylan Cease can repeat his like 2022 FIP as an ERA where he's like in the low threes, and you know, that's a good guy to going forward. Then I'd say like, you know, Clevinger is going to stay healthy, which, you know, he wasn't perfectly healthy at all this season because he had the bicep issue flare up, and you know, he's not really geared for this approach of, you know, missing a below average level of bats. We're not talking about someone who got outs the way like, you know, even Dallas Keuchel got at some point, where you see him transitioning to this mode very well. Before I get to the fact that, like, as they said many times, he was a calculated risk from a personal standpoint. They kind of thought he'd be on a make good project, because he was trying to, like, you know, perform well to get this big contract. He's taking this pillow deal, more or less. And I don't know what you experienced that made you confident that he's going to like be on his best behavior going forward. I don't know why this year would be, you know, yes, the events that he got investigated for were last season, but you know, the information you have received since the day you signed the contract to continue to make that calculated risk going forward, I didn't think it justified at the time. I certainly don't think it justifies it now. So I would move on from that standpoint as well, even if you like, you know, buy into this whole idea of like, well, there was no trouble once the season started, and you know, Pedro Gaffol, for whatever reasons, it's between him and God, you know, takes special effort to talk up his clubhouse presence at every opportunity. I don't think this is a good bet going forward.
Yeah, I think the red flag was when he was talking about like when Rick Hahn was talking about his immaturity and said like how it had flared up here and then, and like Clevinger's asked about it. It's like, yeah, when I was 18, 19, sure. And yeah, they were really referring to when he was 28, 29. And that kind of made me think, well, yeah, that seems like there's going to be an event repeating here. But I guess he was a solid enough citizen to avoid, like, aside from like maybe the Gold Digger entrance music was maybe like his only publicly poor choice that I can think of. Everything else is more or less so many other problems that he didn't really rise to one once the season started. But to me, there's like a Johnny Cueto element of like setting personalities aside and track records. Just in 2022, you weren't sure exactly how Cueto was as good as he was. And then like a lot of people wanted the White Sox to re-sign him as he lingered on the market. And I was thinking like, enjoy the experience as it was, because it's hard to see how that'll happen again. Seeing, all the underlying peripherals, and sure enough, he goes to Miami and throws 50 innings and isn't that effective when he's healthy, and kind of showed that, yeah, it was good to cut it off then.
Yeah, I could see the White Sox opting in because for $12 million, if he can repeat 2023, give you 130 innings, 24 starts, you need it for the rotation. It's another guy that you need in the rotation. From a Mike Clevinger perspective, if I were his agent, we'd be taking the $4 million to testing free agency and see if I can get you a 2-year guaranteed deal based on how well you pitched this year. Because with the injury history and now he's in his 30s, this may be the last chance for Mike Clevinger to get a guarantee 2-3-year contract and to cash in. So I think ultimately I could see the White Sox opting into the mutual option, but guys, I feel like Clevinger's side is going to opt out. And that's why I'm expecting Mike Clevinger to be a free agent and test the waters. James, do you think the White Sox would circle back and try to sign Mike Clevinger to a new contract?
I would not. This has been a headache. What are they like? Why would they invite this like over again? Like, yeah, he's got good rapport with like the coaches here, but this always felt like a 1-year marriage to me, and they very much like got what they wanted out of it, but while the monkey paw like finger like curled at the same time. And so I don't think you go back to that same store that you bought the monkey paw from afterwards. Like, well, this was a fair trade in the end.
When I saw the Milwaukee Bucks make that big trade with Portland for Damian Lillard, I immediately went on Game Time to see when they were playing the Chicago Bulls. Saw it was on November 30th, and Game Time had great seats in the 300 level right at center court in the United Center. Great tickets at a great price. I couldn't pass up the opportunity. Buying tickets shouldn't be stressful. Use Game Time to purchase your tickets. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. They've got killer deals on last-minute tickets, and their best price guarantee helps eliminate stressing over tickets. If you find tickets in the same section and even row for less money, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. That's why Game Time is the fastest growing ticketing app in the country. Download the Game Time app, create your account, and get $20 off your first purchase using our promo code SOXMachine. Terms and conditions apply. Again, create an account and use our promo code SOXMachine for $20 off your first ticket purchase. Game Time. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed.
Fads come and go, and nowhere more than in the world of weight loss. That's why Noom has created weight management programs that are made to last. Noom uses science and personalization so you can manage your weight for the long term. Their psychology-based approach helps you build better habits and behaviors that are easier to maintain. And they help you understand the science behind your eating choices and why you have those cravings. Noom's personalized courses are easy to follow and will help grow your confidence with tools you can put into practice on day one. The best part? You decide how Noom fits into your life, not the other way around. And based on a sample of 4,272 Noomers, 98% say Noom helps change their habits and behaviors for good. So stop chasing health trends and join the millions who have lost weight with Noom. Sign up for your trial today at Noom.com. That's Noom.com to sign up for your trial today.
So then let me circle back to you regarding Michael Kopech. And I'm not even going to bother diving into the numbers because they're ugly, and I don't want to make White Sox fans more pessimistic, especially after we talked about the infield in a previous episode. James, is Michael Kopech a starting pitcher anymore?
I think he will be, because the lack of options. I think there's at least a little bit of let's let him work with Bannister for an off season and see what he looks like in spring training. Theoretically, Ronaldo Lopez and Carlos Rodon were battling for that fifth starter spot once, and one guy showed up looking like he had the stuff to kind of dominate the world, and one guy didn't and moved towards a bullpen role. So maybe some sort of path like that could come, but at the same time, it's both. It was always kind of fringe command for this. I think the farther the organization moves from trying to get this elite stuff and move someone up from 30 command to 40 command and make them be like this kind of erratic but dominant, overpowering starter, and get more towards the Cleveland model of getting guys who can command, throw strikes, and then seeing what they can amp up to play in the rotation more. I think that'd be better for them. So that'd be moving away from these projects like Kopech. But certainly the fact that this knee issue, the cyst, an issue on back-to-back years, that doesn't necessarily get better for moving to a bullpen at all. But you give yourself kind of an out. You are assigning fewer innings to the basis that this can stay healthy. So I think he will be. I think it's probably a last chance sort of year. I would say that as someone who I thought was like the highest ceiling arm in the organization back when, in 2017, 2018, and, maybe he was, but just we're not seeing that ceiling. I think it should be a last chance. And it certainly, it seems like, the level of frustration that he had toward the end of the season, you just start thinking like, what can you do to get him out of this? And certainly there wasn't an immediate click in the bullpen, but is there some other way to get him to operate where he's not writing himself so much on every mistake or everything that goes by, and maybe working back-to-back days and maybe having more of a go out, let it eat, and then flush it type of work process would be better suited for him, because he was just not in a great place the second half of the season.
So that's interesting. I didn't even think about the mental aspect for Michael Kopech and the struggles trying to stick as a starting pitcher. And Jim, Kopech, his strikeout rate was a little below 23%, but we talked about Dylan Cease's walk rate at 10%, and that's high. When you look at other great starting pitchers in Major League Baseball, they're not approaching 10%. Kopech's at 15%. And it's going to take a lot of work for Michael Kopech to even get to Dylan Cease's current level right now, to cut 5% of his walk total next year. I think it would be a little too much to ask to cut Kopech's walk rate in half. But this is where I am most curious about the Brian Bannister hiring, Jim. Because I wonder, yes, there's a part of how can we make Dylan Cease better, but I think this is the biggest project for Brian Bannister. Can you figure out Michael Kopech? Because when the White Sox acquired him, as he was being developed, the idea was that he could be someone that helped lead the rotation. And now here we are entering the 2024 season, and we still don't know what role makes the most sense for Michael Kopech.
Yeah, the walk rate is actually understating it a little bit, because it was nearly 20% in the second half. Like, he was challenging that. He had an 8.10 ERA, and usually you think like, oh, that must have taken like a series of unfortunate events, but it was actually better than his FIP. His FIP was 8.26 because of that nearly 20% walk rate. So it feels like last year in 2022, when he was gutting through starts, it seemed like there was something useful to that, like seeing if he could get past 100 innings, seeing if he could shoulder a starting rotation job for a 6-month grind. It just so happened that like the White Sox were mismanaging so many other injuries that it felt like it wasn't so much a calculated risk that they're going with Kopech as much as it was just like, well, they just might be negligent in every certain regard. So maybe they just aren't paying attention to just how Kopech his stuff's really fallen off with just the knee issues he's trying to pitch through. And this year kind of felt like a continuation of that, especially like after the first couple months where the knee issue really started just eating into his control and not being able to even like get out of like a second, first 2 innings cleanly, a first time through the order cleanly. So like that, I can see the mental wear and tear of just feeling like, I thought I was supposed to be past this. I thought the book was supposed to be closed and just grinding through it. And now most of my season is another grind, and I'm supposed to be better than somebody who's like, it almost makes him basically like Touki Toussaint. Like that kind of guy who's getting by with a sketchy walk rate, hoping that his stuff can occasionally tick up. And like, he's not supposed to be Touki Toussaint. He's supposed to be somebody, a clear level above, if not 2, based on the kind of hype and prospect status. And ultimately when he was on the doorstep before surgery and the missed COVID year, that set him back a little bit. So I can see why, like, he might need a reset and maybe like a different organization, getting a look at him. So I hope that Brian Bannister is maybe a different organization enough to just say, like, here are the expectations. Here's what we want you to do. Here's our escape route in case like opening in the rotation doesn't go well. Here's how we're going to make it not feel like a failure if we do have to reassign you to the bullpen. Here are some like checkpoints we want you to get in terms of velocity, how long you maintain your velocity, etc. Because like his stuff was flagging even when he was only going 1 or 2 innings at a time. Like that's when it seemed like the knee issue really just became unmanageable, or whether just everything else kind of overcame his ability to even like top 95. He was like slider first at the end of the year, which he shouldn't be. So there are a lot of things you can improve. It just, when you have like this prolonged stretch of just barely getting by, if that, it makes it hard to think like, oh, you're just 1 click away from recapturing the form that made you be able to throw 6 dominant innings with basically 1.5 pitches.
We've got a different organization at home.
Pretty much, yeah.
Well, James, has Brian Bannister tipped his hand at all? Has he identified any of the pitchers that he wants to work with closely this offseason?
I haven't spoken to the man, but I think him and Kopech are obviously they know each other from Boston, and they've talked already. So I would assume that there's interaction already going on.
And then after Michael Kopech, which again I think is an interesting debate, and love to hear your guys' feedback in the comment section at soxmachine.com. Is Michael Kopech a starter? I think that'll provide a healthy discussion, because I think a lot of people that respond and comment every day on soxmachine.com, it seems split as far as, yes, some people still want to believe. No, a lot of people just want him to be in the bullpen, maybe be a high leverage reliever. Hey, the White Sox could use a closer to start the season. That pretty much leaves you Touki Toussaint, Jesse Schultens, and Nick Nastrini. I think we have a good idea, James, of what Toussaint and Schultens can provide. The unknown is Nick Nastrini. Now, he did make 8 starts within the White Sox minor leagues, 4 in Birmingham and 4 in Charlotte. How close is he really? Is this someone that we're going to hear a lot about in the offseason from Pedro Grifol when he speaks to the media about how he's expecting Nastrini to compete for a starting job in 2024?
Yeah, I imagine so. I don't know. I think it would be imprudent for him to really have a real shot at you should build up the rotation so that he should not win a starting job out of spring training. But I think he's your...
That's not the White Sox way, James.
I don't want to say this year's Sean. I don't want to say this year's Sean Burke, because obviously that would not be what you want him to fulfill. But I think he should be that prospect who has a chance to earn himself like a midseason call-up with good performance and steady results in AAA. As much as you never really want any starter to have prolonged exposure to the horrors of Truist Field in Charlotte. Yeah, I think the way you put it in the description of is who will get me intrigues me more out of the three. I would go with the actual prospect out of the three with Nastrini. It's funny because I was talking about like they need to go with guys who can show that they can repeat the delivery and command and throw strikes, and that I feel like that should be more the bedrock of who their starting prospects were. And because you have the old front office, carry out the trades, they traded for two more stuff monsters who you're trying to squeeze into the rotation on their way out the door. And Nastrini obviously looked a lot more convincing than Eater, even though I got the days after the trade, there are people who were raving about like, well, Jake Berger's this 280 OBP power hitter, and Eater's got like elite stuff. Like this is a trade that could go really well for him, and then maybe he'll have to go well later because it went really poorly at the start. But Nestrini's a guy who struggled to throw strikes in a way, but you kind of hope the athleticism, it's a little bit similar to Cease, where this dude is athletic enough to theoretically repeat his delivery. If you get him timed up, you get him synced up in some way. So I think I'd want to see more of that before you're really talking about putting this dude in the rotation. But he's 24. He's done well enough. It seems like he certainly was, commanding his fastball at the top of the zone the way they wanted him to. As much as that seems like something that was in vogue in 2015, he was something that Nastrini, when I talked to him, said is that he was told a lot in UCLA to throw the ball down, throw the fastball down all the time, even though he had a riding four-seamer. So he's still kind of adjusting to that a little bit, but it seemed like that progress was going well. So I think he legit could be like, he looks like a good piece. It looks like a good thing. They needed starting pitching. He has the athleticism and the stuff to really be a mid-rotation piece if it goes well, and certainly look positive. So I'm optimistic about him as much as I can be optimistic about anything as the White Sox at this point. Whereas, I think Schulten's, even talking to Sox people about him, we're trying to talk him up and say like, this stuff's really mediocre, but he tunnels it well, he repeats it well, he makes everything look the same. You're going to have to earn your hits off of him, but he's not going to be a guy who's overpowering. I think he's kind of built to be that six starter type, and Tukey's this guy who, I'd laugh at how blunt he is about it. He's like, well, repeating my deliveries, that's been my fatal flaw my whole career, and he just says it like outright in a post-game interview. So I think you always want to know, like, if he gets an off season with his team, or he raves about working with cats. If he comes at spring training, it looks more consistent. But I think he's probably more of the swingman type, where if he's synced up, he looks pretty good and he gives you 5 good innings. And if he's not, you have blow up starts like he had near the end of the year, where he's just falling behind everybody and getting pounded. So I think I vote for Nastrini out of the three. Good debate though.
Yeah. So that leaves us now with an eye into the offseason, and the White Sox, Chris Getz, they got a lot of work to do here, Jim. I think they got to find at least 2 starting pitchers this offseason, some way, somehow, to help them just to get through at least the first half of 2024. Fake compete, I guess we could call it, just to see if everything can click. And oh my gosh, we are actually competing. We won't sell off at the deadline. So when you look at the free agent market, and in a previous episode in the roundtable, and I'm right, this is the worst middle infield free agent market in the history of Major League Baseball. On the starting pitching side, I feel like there's depth here. Like, you do have tiers. It's not like the 2019 winter meetings where we're all waiting to see where Steven Strasburg was going to sign, where Garrett Cole was going to sign, and then you had the Dallas Keuchel and Hyun-Jin Ryu tier. But when you look at the free agents that are going to be out there, obviously number 1 is going to be Blake Snell, now with Shohei Ohtani not able to pitch. Aaron Nola is going to be a free agent. Then you have veterans like Sonny Gray, who pitched really, really well for the Minnesota Twins. Jordan Montgomery has pitched really well for the Texas Rangers after that trade. We'll see what happens with Marcus Stroman and Kyle Hendricks with the Chicago Cubs. And even, I don't know if he's going to play again, but Clayton Kershaw is technically a free agent. You have a scatter here. You have a pile of starting pitchers that had at least a 2-WAR season, according to Fangraphs, entering free agency. Who are some of the targets that you think make the most sense, Jim, for the White Sox to go after?
Well, if you consider Brian Bannister and just like his history, there are a few like former Giants on the market that, you know, had some decent turns. Like Jacob Junis is a guy who got out of the Royals system, and you know, I remember reading about it first through Royals blogger saying like, oh, here's another guy the Royals had no idea what to do with, and now he's contributing with the Giants. And there's also Alex Wood, who's a free agent, and they had a pretty good turn with him, you know, around some injuries, I believe. Sean Manaea doesn't seem like he's probably going to opt out based on, I'm looking at numbers right now, but he
shouldn't opt out.
Yeah, that's like, yeah, it didn't go that well. Like he had some moments, I think, towards the end of the year that, you know, provided some upside, but he's kind of like on the Mike Clevinger thing to where, you know, there might be too much depth on the free agent market to really pay off for somebody like him, especially if there isn't like a hefty buyout that Clevinger is getting. So there are some former Giants. So that's one path I could see where Bannister is like, yeah, I've worked with these guys before. I'll work with them again. They shouldn't cost too much, or at least maybe you invest in one guy and try to cut a corner with another, like the White Sox did with, ended up with Johnny Cueto and Vince Velasquez. Like, not in that order, like they got Velasquez first, but like Cueto ended up being like the guy they needed, and Velasquez was the guy who was experimental and like ultimately he was a swingman if nothing else. Ate some innings, had a couple decent spot starts, and they could use him for $3 million. And I can see a similar role.
Which guy was the serious investment out of those two?
Well, I mean, like in terms of like what they gave. They got one guy they needed, one guy they thought. It just didn't happen to be in the order they assumed. But like I can see them pursuing a similar route where they, you know, get one guy for say like 10+ million, another guy for $3 million, and I could see like somebody like on the Junis tier being a guy like Bannister likes and will want to continue working with. The other thought is like getting Jack Flaherty with the Ethan Katz thing and trying to get Lucas Giolito back and having like the John Jay aftermath of like, what are you doing here? Nobody actually likes you guys enough to try this convoluted chain of events. So that's the other path.
Well, I'm glad you brought up Giolito. James Giolito, the experience in Anaheim and Cleveland. He pitched for 3 teams last year. I was not expecting that. Not great. It's really hurt his overall value. I mean, at the deadline, he was building up to a pretty impressive season, 3-4 WAR, entering free agency. I thought, listen, with his age at 29 years old and how he's pitched in the past and even in this season, he could merit a $100+ million contract. I don't think that's going to be the case here for Lucas Giolito. Would Giolito entertain the idea of returning to the White Sox?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, he'd be comfortable working here. You know, he'd be comfortable living here. I think, you know, in the standpoint of looking for his long-term deal, it wasn't going to be a match. But if he's viewing the idea of like a pill contract, I think he'd have a lot of confidence about being able to succeed here. At the same time, like I think he wants to do his own. He'd probably need to see some evidence or have some conversations that, like, you know, convince them if they're moving in the right direction. Some areas, both like clubhouse or strength training, or some of the stuff that, you know, he was, you know, had started doing on his own, and, you know, seemed like aimed towards how he's going to handle the rest of his career when he's with some other team on a big market deal. But certainly, the idea of like going somewhere that he's comfortable so he can produce. I don't think he dismissed it at all. I mean, he's always had warm feelings towards the organization. So I think the idea of like have a good year with Ethan and, you know, parlay that into the deal that he was thinking of, I don't think that'd be a ridiculous notion at all. But I think if like you gave him like some random like creative player name, I'd be like, this guy, like his stuff is backed up and it's been this way for like a year or two. And, you know, we aren't really the same action on his pitches that we had before. Whereas like, you tell me like Lucas Giolito, my thought is like bring our boy home, like bring you know, certainly someone who has cultivated good relationships with the media and you know, has always kind of represented the organization well, where you just kind of it'd be a nice thing to kind of embrace, you know, for a season that you maybe don't have these great overall hopes from, just to see a player who's, you know, a big part of when things are good coming back.
The one thing that confused me about Giolito is when he went to Anaheim and then was traded from Anaheim to, or moved on to Cleveland. And he talked about like how it wasn't the numbers were the numbers, but it wasn't a complete missed opportunity because the Angels helped him rediscover his fastball velocity. And like, it did tick up, I think 1 mile per hour, but like, was that something true or something he was saying to be nice, being like professionally courteous about an organization he was with and, didn't perform well enough with to really disparage the Angels? Like, cause it struck me as weird. Like, I would imagine Ethan Katz was supposed to be that guy to help him, harness all of his available velocity versus like a team like the Angels, which historically doesn't develop pitching, to be the ones to figure it out.
I mean, I had talked to him a little bit, and at one point after a good start in Anaheim, he was really optimistic and said like, "Oh, we made a really good adjustment. I'm really confident going forward." And I was like, "All right, great, best of luck, man. Hope you kill it." But then he ran into troubles again, and you see his fastball getting killed again. So it's he had moments where it seemed like he was genuinely optimistic about some things turning around, and then ran into some more type of struggles and just didn't have any consistency, that he had really in May and June with the White Sox. So I don't know. It's hard to put a thing on things, but on balance, it doesn't really look like he did really recover, the stuff he had. And, he said as much, like, my stuff, when I've talked to him about his stuff is like, 2020 was the peak. And I'm kind of more, using know-how at this point in my career. So I think that's a good evolution for any pitcher to go to, but it also doesn't make me say like, the stuff is back better than ever, sign him to 10 years, type of endorsement.
Yeah, he may need to, it's maybe not the same kind of contract, but something similar that Carlos Rodon did in San Francisco with when Brian Bannister was there, that 1-year contract with the player option that if he can prove it, that it wasn't a fluke in 2021 and it wasn't a fluke in 2022 when he was with the San Francisco Giants, he could leverage that into a much larger deal, which is not working out great for the New York Yankees. They love to bag.
Tell the Giants they'll eat that money and bring Carlos to work with Bannister and Katz at the same time. We'll have the strength of 3 men.
Yes, let's do it. While I would love for the White Sox to sign Blake Snell and Aaron Nola, I think that is pie in the sky, and I don't see that being realistic. But I'm intrigued, like, in that type of tier, like Jordan Montgomery had a 4-WAR season this year with St. Louis and Texas. And when it comes to starting pitching, I'm not so set on handiness, but the more I'm watching the American League postseason and the more I'm seeing the teams in the division, man, there's a lot of left-handed hitters. So maybe it makes sense to go after, if you can't afford Blake Snell or Jerry Reinsdorf doesn't want to spend the money to afford Blake Snell, could you possibly get Jordan Montgomery into the rotation? And then you have some of these mid-30 guys, like Kenta Maeda is a free agent. Andrew Heaney could be a possible free agent from Texas. Another Texas lefty, Martin Perez, could be a free agent. It is a bit sad, Jim. Like, if Jerry Reinsdorf really wants to compete in 2024, and I said this on 670 and I still believe it. Like, if you are looking for the best route for optimism and radically change your roster, spending money on the starting pitching free agent market this offseason is probably your best bet. Because if you blow the bank and you sign Blake Snell and Aaron Nola and Jordan Montgomery, for example, and you pair that up with Dylan Cease, then you're going to give yourself at least a fighting chance to start the season because you have 4 quality starting pitchers to help you out. I just don't see Jerry Reinsdorf ever going that route, even at the age of 87, and he still wants to see one more winning team. So now I'm finding myself resorted to the fact of who would sign 1-year, 2-year deals, because that is probably what Chris Getz can get approved upon from Jerry Reinsdorf.
Yeah, Jerry Reinsdorf can take it with him, and he'll prove you wrong. He'll be the first one to do it. It's where I get locked up in trying to figure out like how the White Sox can possibly like turn their rotation around meaningfully is like the divide between Dallas Keuchel and Zach Wheeler, where like Wheeler was the guy to spend $125 million on, and they tried. Basically, it seems like they tried. Like, that didn't seem like Bob Nightingale saying like, yeah, the White Sox made a competitive offer the way they made in certain respects, a superior offer to Manny Machado when it wasn't the deal Machado wanted at all. Like Wheeler, it sounded like they did offer him more money and he just wanted to be in Philadelphia, but like they wanted to pay $125 million for him. Keuchel, they only needed to pay mid-50s for. And you could understand why, because like 4 years later, Wheeler's still good. Keuchel was good for like 1.5 seasons and then he tailed off. So like it does seem like you need a critical mass of outside arms in order to make up for what could be some guys tailing off after, into their second season, because they're in their mid-30s. They don't have elite stuff and it could very well catch up with them. Problem is, like, yeah, you already have Dylan Cease who's battling that right now in terms of, has he already physically peaked? And is he trying to get by with like, substandard control and just really good spinny stuff that is still above average, even if it's not like the best pitch in the world. And then it's like Michael Kopech and nobody else. So that's why, like, to me, it just seems like it's going to be pillow contracts or modest investments to make the team watchable, to not burn out a bullpen, to not make it feel totally rebuildy, because I think there are enough arms here to where you can sign a couple of pitchers who upgrade the rotation no matter what. But like, I like Jordan Montgomery, I think the most of like the Nola Snell tier, and I think he'd fit, but like he is a lefty who is like not super overpowering, so maybe he does have those ebbs and flows that any kind of lefty along those lines has, that make you feel like by the time the rest of the rotation's coming into some kind of form and the position player side is better, like all of a sudden you have Andrew Benintendi who's making way too much money, and you have somebody like Montgomery who's not earning the money he should be, and because Reinsdorf is still managing the budget, like he's not going to spend past that.
So after the White Sox signed Whit Merrifield and they trade for Salvador Perez, James, Zach Greinke, right? That completes the trifecta?
Yeah, I guess that makes sense in terms of like the Royals theme. I feel like the next like White Sox thing that could be on like the Whit Merrifield edition is the press release that says the White Sox sign all-star right-hander Michael Lorenzen, and like they really tout like the all-star thing with it, and it's like a 2-year deal or something like that. Bringing back memories, there was a really dedicated effort to make it clear to the beat writers, like the moment the Zach Wheeler like signing broke, to be like, we were the high offer of this guy. Let it be known. It's like this mass communication. I was like, I'm on vacation. I'm not going to like. It was like when they announced somebody's on the IL and all the beat writers tweet it like 4 times in a row, and you see it like second difference. It was like that level of.
He rejected us.
Let it be known. I guess my question with like long-term pitchers is like, Montgomery will be 31 opening day next season. Snell's getting that same place, and obviously has this razor's edge relationship with his control as well. You need to give out these big multi-year deals to get any pitcher who's really worth their salt, or comes with some level of security in terms of their performance. How much do you want to go, especially if you're going to like be, if their age 31, age 32 season is going to be for a team that we don't expect to be any good? Do you want to really just live only in 1 to 2 year, mostly pillow contracts, rather than we're going to spend like a huge outlay knowing that the first year is kind of, towards a project that's not kind of null and void? Do you want to put all your kind of free agent money resources towards stuff that can be more or less flipped towards, and get resources towards the next team that will be good? So that's why the lack of clarity on whether next year's team is, reloading or rebuilding or what they're doing. I think, you can't run from it forever, because at some point you need to find in free agency what the hell you're doing. And, Jordan Montgomery would be a great addition, in terms of left-handedness, at least not a ground ball maven, but at least not allergic to ground balls. Or, Nola would be great because he's the rare over 50 ground ball guy, or maybe I'm looking at his playoff stats, not the right ones, but Yeah, he's more middle of the road, but that level of investment makes a lot more sense if this is a team that's trying to win the division next year, which is not the most ridiculous goal because this division is always bad, and that's basically the party line from the organization nowadays. But is that worth it? If theoretically, every big free agency contract, the most important year is that first year of getting that guaranteed production because you can't project much after that. Is it worth it to do that if next year's team is as bad as it looks right now when we try to figure out a 5-man rotation?
Yeah, that's a good point, James. And I think like Blake Snell and Aaron Nola, they're going to sign 5+ year contracts. If Jordan Montgomery is willing to entertain like a Lance Lynn type of a deal that the White Sox signed, like 3 years, $55 to $60 million, I think you got to be part of that conversation. But I agree with both of you. Like, for everyone that's doing your offseason,
he might have just put himself out of it tonight.
He might have, yeah. I mean, the way that he's pitching in Game 1 of the ALCS against the Houston Astros, and the way he's pitching this postseason, he at 31 may get a 4 or 5 year type of contract and put him out of the White Sox spending habits. That's just kind of, again, if you're looking for optimism, if you want to radically change the White Sox fortune, I think this is the market in the off season that you can do it. But if you want to live in the world of reality and be like, who are some realistic targets that the White Sox will go after? It's probably the 1 to 2 year guys that are in their mid-30s or they're coming off an uneven season. And the White Sox got a great selling pitch, Jim. We've got Dylan Cease, and that's it in our starting rotation. So if you want starts, you could be a starting pitcher with us.
You could have like Nick Nastrini doing the free agent recruitment, saying like, I didn't think I had a chance. The Dodgers here, I have so much margin for error and they still have to turn to me. Think about the kind of expectations you'll have and how glad people will be if you can like make 4 starts in a row that, you're not tripping over yourself. So yeah, that's, I think the standards you're dealing with, but yeah, I still see this as more of just a sign a few guys, kind of like a comb over, for this year with the rotation, hoping that Nastrini or Mano, who we haven't really talked much about in terms of him being able to make the jump into the rotation at some point in 2024, whether Eater clicks, 1 year removed after Tommy John surgery, whether Kai Bush's move to the other side of the rubber makes a difference. Like, there probably are some internal options who might help you flesh out those 3rd through 5th spots a little bit to maybe make that one big pitcher contract more worth it and kind of more targeted and more sensible versus just trying to spray money everywhere because everything's on fire.
At the risk of making one of those like pray for the league type of a speculation post, like theoretically at the end this time next year, maybe Montgomery's debuted, maybe Ramos is debuted, like all these guys like debuted or like ready to debut the next year. Like Montgomery, Ramos, Caro, Nastrini, Mena, wouldn't that be the year to maybe like push your resources forward rather than this year where it's like, well, maybe Tim Anderson will come back to life, or like it's maybe this thing that will poke with a stick will start moving, and like is that like the thing to invest in versus like where you could really actually see something of a core starting to matriculate towards the majors, in 2025.
So best of luck to everyone with your offseason plan projects when adding pitching, probably more into the mid-tier. Try to find those guys that you think they'll sign for like a 1 year or maybe like a 2 year with a player option or club option for the White Sox to fill out the starting rotation. But that will conclude this episode recapping the 2023 White Sox starting pitchers alongside Jim Margulis and, of course, our friend James Fegan. James, thank you so much for joining us on the Sox Machine podcast again.
I'll submit an offseason plan where I just submit my bold idea of why bother 2024 White Sox. Pack it in for next year already.
I look forward to that. I definitely look forward to that. So thank you everyone for listening to this episode. If you just discovered the Sox Machine podcast, you subscribe to our show wherever you listen to podcasts. We also upload our podcast episodes into our YouTube channel, which you can watch over at youtube.com/SoxMachine. If you do watch our videos on youtube.com/SoxMachine, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. On social media, we're all there now. You can follow us at Sox Machine. You can follow me at SoxMachine_. Josh, you can follow James on Twitter at JR Fegan. You can bug him over there. If you enjoy our work and you want more, you can get more by becoming a Patreon supporter at patreon.com/SoxMachine, where our Patreon supporters get exclusive content and ad-free versions of both the podcast and the website. Monthly plans start at $2, or you can save with an annual subscription. Again, sign up at patreon.com/SoxMachine. The Sox Machine podcast is a production of SoxMachine.com. You're on for all things Chicago White Sox baseball and part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network. Alongside James Fegan and Jim Margulis, I'm Josh Nelson. Thanks for listening and watching.